Hi, and welcome again to the show. I'm Leslie Choice. My guest today is Beth Powning, who's the author of Shadow Child and a more recent novel called The Hatbox Letters. She lives in New Brunswick. She's here today. Welcome to the show.
Nice to be here.
Tell me about that farm in New Brunswick where you live.
It's at the end of a valley. When we first moved there, it really was the end of the valley. The road didn't go any farther. Now we get plowed out in the winter, so it's very quiet. There are just a few farms around us, and I live there with my husband and who is an artist, my son who is a swordsmith and who lives next door down the valley with his wife and two little girls, my two ponies, and my dog.
Just like a big farm, like 100 acres or something like that?
It's a big farm. It's a 300-acre farm. I
Oh.
mean, but we're not farming it as a 300-acre farm.
Wow.
We have pasture and have offered the fields to anybody who would like to use them. And we try to keep some of the fields from growing back to the wild in case anybody would ever like to have them. And so it's a big open fields around the house, and then a lot of beautiful woodlands.
Is that a really essential part of who you are as a writer, this place where you live and what you're surrounded by?
Yes. It really is. Although it's interesting, I'm wondering as I go off into fiction, I have another novel in my head, and it may not be, it might be somewhere else.
Mm-hmm.
But I think the way I live and the way I see the world is very, very much influenced by where I live.
Well, I know from your previous books there's a really powerful interconnection with nature and also with the past, and I see that kind of tied in with that landscape that you're at. Is this one of those unique chosen destinations where I know you moved there from Connecticut, I think, 30-some years ago, happily ever after?
Yes, we came to New Brunswick because there was part of my family who had lived there years ago. My great-grandfather had an axe handle factory in St. Stephen. Of course, that's going way back. And then my grandfather, as a child, moved down to the States. But this is very common in New Brunswick, up and down the coast. So there was a bit of connection there. There was some furniture in our house growing up that we took back to New Brunswick. But it was a wonderful, wonderful, happy chance that we took the turn that we took when we were exploring New Brunswick and found that farm at the end of the valley and decided that that's where we would live and really have stayed there. And I feel very much the roots going down with my son living there and my grandchildren growing up there and loving it there.
Is there some connection there with the axe handles from your ancestor and your son being a swordsmith? You threw that term out as if that was a common occupation. I don't know too many out there. Is there any link there?
I know, it's pretty interesting. He grew up drawing pictures of swords. Mm-hmm. Maybe it's because when he was an infant, we read The Lord of the Rings to him when he was about 4 days old, because
Right.
we wanted to read something we wanted to read, so we read it out loud to him. I blame this on, no, but anyway.
Interesting.
No, but no, there's no connection with the axe handles, but he does make swords for a living.
Fascinating. Now we'll go to the book, The Hatbox Letters. Your protagonist, Kate, is delivered 9 old hat boxes full of letters and other bits of the past. And this kind of takes her on a journey. What kind of a journey is it?
It's a journey of truth. It's a journey about finding out what really happened in the past, as opposed to what you think might have happened or what you never thought about happening in the past. It's interesting. I have in the beginning of the book Kate standing on a threshold, looking at those boxes and feeling a bit ambivalent about getting into them, because so much in her life is gone. She's lost her husband, her children have moved away. And one thing that is constant is her memory of her grandparents and this wonderful house that they had in this place she went as a child that was like a paradise. And she thinks, well, you know, sometimes when you read about the past, it changes your memory. It changes the way you remember things. You see that maybe your memory was only a bit of the truth, and it wasn't really that way. So that's really what the voyage is about. It's about facing how seeing the past whole and in all its aspects can be a very freeing and liberating and forward-moving experience. There's a section in the book where Kate is reading a letter, and it's from her grandfather's fiancé, and she's talking about the house. And she describes something that Kate, as a child, knew very well, the back door step and the glassed-in porch. And yet, she suddenly realizes, with almost a sort of a sense of effrontery, these people don't know me. They don't even know I'm going to exist. And here they are writing about my place.
Mm-hmm.
You know, there's this feeling about the past that it's yours. And,
Right.
and it is.
Mm-hmm.
And so there's a conflict there, and in the end, Kate addresses that, well, it is still mine. My treasured past is still there, but it's been expanded.
Right. Now, you tip off the reader on the first page that these artifacts are going to connect emotional strands of love, sorrow, pain, and contentment. What's the nature of that emotional chemistry, maybe especially the connection between sorrow and love?
That is about how every moment tilts on the edge of its own decline,
Mm-hmm.
which is something that obsesses me.
You're going to have to explain that now. I got
Okay.
halfway there with you, but take me
Okay.
the rest of that way. Every moment.
Every moment is about to be gone.
Mm-hmm.
The present is always fading into the past.
Yes.
And there's this sense of me, not Kate, me, the writer. I've always felt a kind of a pain about that. So that even as...
Why? Because you want to hold on to the present,
Yeah.
right? That's the,
Yeah. You don't want the past.
Why can't we do that? Why can't we hang on to
Because
the
we're
present?
not Buddhas, you see. I think that's what I was getting at with that sense of that smell, that's a sense of love and sorrow. I've often thought about that, like when you're at a dinner table and the whole family is there, and you think, and I, in this perverse way, always think, here we are. We're not going to be here tomorrow. You know, this is so precious. This moment is so precious. But the sorrow part of it is that it's not going to last. It's everything is falling back, is falling away. And in a way, this book for me is a coming to terms with that feeling of grief, I guess,
Mm-hmm.
that I feel very strongly within myself, that I love life so much, and it's always sliding away, everything's sliding away, you know, and this sense of wanting to hold on. I had that even when I was a little girl. I had that
Sure.
feeling of, I want to hold on to everything.
Now, I've looked through old letters, like my grandfather's letters to my grandmother, to be back during World War I. You know, and this is amazing. What was interesting was when his materials were being collected and divvied up among the family, I was like the last one there, and here was this box of letters, and thinking that, gee, they weren't all that important to other people. I grabbed onto them, and I read through them, and it's sort of taken back to a very different time and place, you know, a person, you know, alive before I was ever imagined or conceived. What about today? We're emailing each other, and we don't generally print out those emails and save them, and everything is very quick, and it changes. Is there going to be that kind of record of our personal lives for the future generations?
I wonder if young people are, in almost a subconscious way, worrying about that. Because I've had quite a few young people address this issue because of this book, and for a few other reasons. I've had some young people say, I had a grandmother's house and it's gone, and my children are never going to have a house like that because we don't save things anymore. We don't save those. We don't have houses filled with those really old things.
Yes.
And I also had a niece say, show me those pictures because we need to know who these people are. There were some pictures that we had found. I think it's a worry. I love reading letters. I love reading other people's letters. And I recently read letters that my grandmother was writing back to somebody about a problem she had with a well. And she was in Bermuda. And this is other side of the family. And it took a week for the letter to get to New York, and then a week to get back with a decision about what they should do. And then anyway, 2 months later, a decision had been arrived at about what they should do. And I thought, my gosh, today it'd be like, get on the phone and, let's... It's true, there's so much less space in our lives now.
Mm-hmm. Back to Kate in your book for a minute. Is there something in her life that she's looking for some form of healing that this correspondence helps with?
She's lost her husband,
Mm-hmm.
so she's deeply grieving. She's grieving. She's in pain. She's lost. She doesn't know how to move forward. She doesn't know what to do about the fact that she's alone, and she doesn't actively open the boxes
Right.
for healing, but she does find it there.
What happens to you as a writer while you're writing about that kind of experience? Obviously, we all have to go within in some ways, and then you're fictionalizing. Do you live what she's living? Do you have the emotional feelings while you're actually writing it?
It's an interesting question. The last book I wrote, Shadow Child,
Mm-hmm.
was about the loss of a baby.
Right.
As I was writing that book, I was in tears at the computer. I actually got up at night with a feeling on my shoulders of weight for about a year. Like my body would hurt at night. I was so anguished while I wrote that book because it really did happen to me.
And we're going to talk about Shadow Child in just a minute. We're going to take a short break and be back with Beth Powning right after this. Welcome back to the show. My guest is Beth Powning, and I'd like to talk about your book previous to the Hatbox Letters, which was The Shadow Child. You wrote about your own grief and the loss of a child, a stillborn son. We've touched on that briefly, but your whole book is about it, but how do you cope with that kind of loss?
You mean my book Shadow Child is
Yeah.
about it? I would like to say that Shadow Child is being reissued by Vintage next June. And the reason I'm saying that at the top is because I think it's a book that many women really need, and I'm so glad that it's coming back into print. So if anyone tries to find it right now, it's not available,
Right.
but it will be soon.
And this is your life experience. We've been talking about fiction, but now we're back to the real thing.
Now, your question was, how do you deal with it?
How do you begin to cope with that kind of loss?
My book is about how I didn't cope with it.
Mm-hmm.
And Peter and I lost our son Tate 29 years ago. And in those years, people didn't quite understand what women and men who had lost babies needed. I think it's a very different place now. I think that the hospitals and the health professionals are extraordinarily much more understanding. We were still in the years when this kind of thing was swept under the carpet. Mm-hmm. And then, of course, nobody else knew that the baby. So people could think that, well, you were pregnant and now you're not, and it's, it wasn't really a child. But for parents, it's a whole life that never got to be lived.
Yeah.
So it's a terrible tragedy, and it's the people, I've talked to so many people now, and that grief is, every grief is different. But the parents of stillborn babies, there's something so, you can't share it. It's nobody else knew that child. So
you're more isolated even than
it's
someone.
so isolating.
Someone else.
And there's always been, I think, a taboo about it, and it may be because it's so frightening. The concept of a baby being born dead is just, it's your mind kind of can't deal with it because it's birth and death at the same time, and it's just you can't, it's very hard to deal with.
Like so many elements that are difficult in life and tragedies, when you sit and write about it, that too is somewhat healing and liberating, isn't it? To be able to put those words down on paper and share them with others?
Very much so. I had no idea how healing the book would be for me. I had no intention of writing it. My then editor, I mentioned it to her, and she said, Beth, could you write about this? And I thought, oh, no. And within 3 days, I thought, well, maybe I can. It was an amazing voyage because when I had no idea until I had written the book and started on my book tour how many other people there were who had had the same experience. Yes. And that was the healing thing. People running up out of audiences when I was on TV shows saying, this happened to me, this was my story. And then I'd say, yes. And I still get letters. To this day, I get letters from people who've found the book and read it.
I noticed that one of those phases that you went through after that tragedy was a great sense of guilt. From the outside, that would seem like, well, that's not necessary, that's not logical, that's not your fault. Why guilt?
I think every parent goes through that. You feel that your job as a parent was to bring that child into the world, and you failed. And that's the overwhelming feeling. And I didn't realize it. I didn't even realize I didn't even have names for those feelings. Yeah. For years, until I started to kind of disinter them and think, oh, this is what I'm feeling. And the reading that I did and the research that I did, I thought, oh, I'm not alone. Every parent feels this. And then I began to talk to women, and so many of them said, well, I went into the basement and picked up a bushel of beets that morning. And I thought all kinds of things. I went skiing that day. I took these vitamin pills. This. You're certain that. And the other really horrible thing is, and many women may feel this, is that somehow the baby chose not to be born and therefore didn't want.
Is that how some people interpret it?
That's how I felt.
Did you?
I thought, didn't want me. I wasn't going to be a good enough mother. I mean, these are crazy feelings, but they're there. Getting them out of yourself, seeing them, talking about them, articulating them, and best of all, having somebody else say, that's exactly how I felt, is very helpful and very important.
You quite naturally went through a period of fairly severe depression as a result of this. How did you bring yourself up out of it, or did you have others who helped you to do that?
Well, the interesting thing is it didn't happen for 20 years. And apparently that's quite typical. And this does relate to the Hatbox Letters in the sense of my understanding of what happens when you don't mourn. You don't allow yourself to mourn. The culture that I came out of, which is a fairly repressed white Anglo-Saxon Protestant tradition, didn't think that mourning was seemly. You don't cry in front of other people. You don't grieve. You don't burden people with your pain. And that's how I didn't. I just clammed up and didn't talk to anyone about it. Then 20 years later, you plunge into a serious depression. And I did the best things that there are to do for depression, which was see my doctor, see my psychiatrist, get through it, and begin to talk. And and my life changed. I learned at that point that you can change. You can change. And that was the most wonderful feeling. Think, I was about to be this person, but now I'm going to be this person.
There's a new path to take. And we're going to take another short break and be right back with Beth Powning. Welcome back to the show. Beth, in Shadow Child, you're writing about this very personal, intense, difficult experience. Isn't that a big risk to be writing that and putting it in a book and having other people reading it. Did you feel that at all while you were writing it?
Yes, I definitely felt that. It was very scary. It was very scary.
But it sounds like as soon as the book was out there, you're getting this response from readers, from other women who've had those experiences, and that gives you the confidence that you did the right thing.
Yep.
What do they say to you? What kind of things do they say?
Mostly they say, oh, all kinds of things. And I was so glad to be able to write in the paperback edition. I asked if I could put little bits from those letters, and I did. They said things like, my family never let me talk about this, so I gave them your book. I said, I want to talk about this. I think it was, they mostly say, I was so helped by this book. Some people said, I couldn't read it. I haven't been able to read it yet, but I have it and I will read it when the right time comes. Yeah. And mostly it's just thank you. It helped me.
In that book, too, you have this very vivid account of the night that your barn burned down. Why did you include that as part of the story?
Because it was very odd. When I looked back through, because this is a totally autobiographical book, and I went through my diaries and journals, and I suddenly thought, it's more than this single event as I'm writing about this. It's about how we learn as we get older that we're going to be shaped by life. And we have to learn to what extent we can allow ourselves to be shaped, and to what extent we want to impose a shape on our lives, and how we can learn from what life throws at us. Learn to let ourselves be shaped. And I saw us as, you know, the 20-year-olds who thought we could do anything, and then one thing after another humbled us and humbled us and humbled us and humbled us. And somehow I saw that as part of the picture, and I also saw it as part of the pattern of why we decided we wanted to have a child. That's when, after the barn burned down, I remember we thought, I think it's time to create a child. It was just part of the whole pattern. And I think this is true of anyone. If you go back and you really study your life, a pattern reveals itself. It's the pattern of because this happened, then this happened. And because this happened, then this happened. Isn't that interesting? And you start to see your life like a river, as if you were watching a topographical map, and you say, oh, this happened, and then the river went this way, and then the river went this way. It was a journey. When
winter is ending on your farm there in New Brunswick, and you go out to look for those first signs of change and spring and rebirth, what do you find?
What do I find on our farm?
What are some of the first bits of evidence that, you know, life is about to emerge again?
The very first ones are along the driveway, and there's this very fine-grained mud, and there are these really fine red shoots that come up. I'm not sure what they are, but they're the first things that I notice. And then there's the coltsfoot.
Yes,
in the
the coltsfoot with the yellow flower.
Yeah, the coltsfoot.
Looks like it should be dandelion, but it isn't, and the flower comes first before anything else.
And the fields are brown, and there's the little colt's feet in the ditch.
My guest today has been Beth Powning. Her book is Hatbox Letters, as well as The Shadow Child and others. And thank you very much for being on the show today.
It was a pleasure.
Thanks for watching. I'll see you again.